Picking up right from where I left off in part one, Epydemic's answer for why even natural disasters and wildlife suffering are compatible with the idea of a loving, omnipotent creator seem mostly to focus on the argument that the mind of man is finite and we cannot comprehend the infinite. And again, Epydemic2020 said if we can't comprehend the infinite, the honest answer is to say, I can't understand why God permits suffering, rather than leap to the conclusion that suffering makes the existence of a benign, omnipotent God improbable. All right, now just speak directly to Epydemic2020. The two of us are approaching this argument of the finite cannot comprehend the infinite from completely different angles. So it makes sense that you would consider this a valid argument, whereas I consider it extremely weak at best. Because in your case, you already have a strong pre-existing framework for belief in Christianity. So I can understand why the finite cannot comprehend the infinite argument would therefore be valid. I understand how it completely fits your worldview to say that an infinite God can have mysterious ways that we humans cannot comprehend. So I know we're not going to move past a stalemate on this point, but I hope you can at least try to understand how this argument sounds from my point of view, which is one where there's no pre-existing framework for a belief in a benign, omnipotent God. And without that pre-existing framework, the argument that the finite cannot comprehend the infinite sounds just as hollow to me coming from a Christian as it sounds coming from a Hindu trying to defend his belief in the caste system, or from a Muslim trying to defend his belief that holy warriors will be rewarded with a harem of virgins in heaven. Christianity, Hinduism, and Islam alike, they can all repeat this truism that the finite cannot be expected to comprehend the infinite, but when the same argument can be used to support every religious claim about the supernatural world, even the most wildly contradictory claims, I find that the argument really supports nothing. Now, I know that you believe that Christianity deserves to be the exception, but I hope you can see why those of us who lack belief in any one religion will find this argument just utterly unconvincing. Now, moving on to a slightly new topic. One of the things that I think make organized religions so vulnerable when it comes to the problem of suffering is that they claim to have books that were directly inspired by our universe's creator. A book by the master designer of everything from tapeworms to tsunamis. And the Judeo-Christian Bible tells it that this is the book we should read to understand God. And it includes passages like 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 16 through 17, which tells us that the Bible is useful for teaching and for training us. So it therefore seemed reasonable to conclude that the Bible should be able to answer questions like why the world was created the way it was. But I wasn't surprised that you didn't turn to the Bible for most of your answers. At least you didn't use the Bible when trying to explain instances of suffering that occur independently of human misbehavior. Because when it comes to things like why God designed mosquitoes the way he allegedly did, well, the Bible just doesn't address it. And when it comes to suffering by causes such as earthquakes and droughts and plagues, well, the Bible does mention these, but unfortunately, at least for the apologist, natural disasters are always linked to God's wrath for human misbehavior. Yet, when we look at the real world, we can see that natural disasters occur in predictable areas depending on purely physical reasons, independent of the sin of the local population, and even dependent on whether there are any humans present at all. For example, there's a wide area in central and southern United States called Tornado Alley, and it gets a fair amount of tornadoes because this is where the moist tropical air from the Gulf of Mexico gets in contact with the dry air from the Rockies and the cold air from Canada, and that combination breeds tornadoes. And the tornadoes sometimes strike hard at densely populated areas and sometimes in deserted areas. And if anyone were to claim that a place like Kansas City gets hit because of human sin, well, that would lead to the puzzling situation of why New York City doesn't get hit with tornadoes, or why New York City gets almost no natural disasters. Because if natural disasters were really punishments from God, as depicted in the Bible, those of us here in New York City, well, we should surely be getting at least our fair share. But again, it's no surprise that you didn't try to use biblical explanations for natural disasters, because the Bible's explanations just don't match up with observations of the real world. Or even to put it more harshly, the Bible's explanations for natural disasters can be something of an embarrassment for today's educated Christians, because the Bible's explanations reflect a primitive mindset. Look at how closely the Bible runs parallel to Greek mythology when it comes to explaining the cause and the cure for plagues. In Book 1 of the Iliad, the Greeks are being devastated by a plague. So Homer writes, Achilles rose and spoke, "Let us ask some priest who can tell us why Apollo is so angry, and whether he will accept the savor of lambs and goats without blemish, so as to take the plague away from us." After the sacrifice, Apollo heard the prayer and stopped the plague. And when the child of morning, rosy-fingered dawn, appeared, Apollo sent them a fair wind. All right, now let's look at 2 Samuel chapter 24, verses 15 and 25. So the Lord sent a plague upon Israel that morning, and 70,000 people died through the nation. David built an altar there to the Lord and offered burnt offerings of oxen. And the Lord answered his prayer, and the plague was stopped. So these are the kind of answers that we get from ancient mythologies, whether Greek or Hebrew. Plagues caused by sin. As for cures, don't look for hygiene or try to find vaccinations. Instead, you sacrifice animals. Now I'm going to note one more parallel here, and this is about the explanations for ocean storms, which, according to ancient mythology, are all about the rage and muscle flexing of the gods. In Book 5 of the Odyssey, Homer wrote, Thereon Poseidon gathered his clouds together, grasped his trident, stirred it round in the sea, and roused the rage of every wind that blows, till earth, sea, and sky were hidden in cloud, and night sprang forth out of the heaven. Now let's look at Jeremiah chapter 5, verse 22, where God allegedly says, "How can it be that you don't even tremble in my presence? I set the shorelines of the world by perpetual decree, so that the oceans, though they toss and roar, can never pass those bounds. Isn't such a God to be feared and worshipped?" So, the Bible is some 1,500 pages long, depending on the size of the font of your particular edition. And it's supposedly the inspired word of an omniscient, omnipotent wisdom. But apologists can't turn to it when it comes to explaining the likes of why God designed life to prey upon life, or why God designed the earth to have earthquakes. Instead of looking to the allegedly holy handbook from omniscient wisdom, apologists are forced to climb out on thin branches to find answers like the infinite, the finite cannot comprehend the infinite. And death is not really a problem because it's just a transition to the next life where everything will be beautiful. And at the risk of being repetitive, well, these catch-all phrases are so broad in scope that they could even defend an Aztec's belief that in order to keep the sun burning, you need to sacrifice young virgins on the altar by tearing their hearts out. Now, if I were able to ask an Aztec why the gods required humans to suffer so much pain, the Aztec apologists could tell me, well, these young virgins are now enjoying, they're being rewarded with the bliss of the afterlife because they gave their lives for the good of the community. Now, if I argued that it really wasn't for the good of the community because we have scientific evidence that the sun is burning because hydrogen is being fused into helium, and this will occur regardless of whether virgins get knifed in the chest here on Earth, the Aztec could always respond with a but. Finite cannot comprehend the infinite. Don't question the will of the gods. Anyway, these are just a few of the reasons that I feel the existence of suffering, particularly the suffering that's a built-in part of nature, remains problematic for anyone who believes in a benign, omnipotent creator of the universe. There are several additional reasons too, but I discussed those in my video series called the Problems of Suffering, or the Problem of Suffering. The 7 supernatural explanations versus the 1 naturalistic, and I'll post a link to that in the description box. I'm going to switch gears here a little bit and talk about how, for many Christians, the problem of suffering really is a problem. And I find that this is the case for the everyday Christian who may not give his or her faith a whole lot of thought through at least their Monday through Saturday. And I also find it's true even for Christian apologetics who study their religion deeply. It may not cause these Christians to abandon their faith, but it does leave a quiet, nagging doubt. And now, from what I can tell from Epydemic's videos and the comments we've exchanged, Epydemic doesn't see the problem of suffering as a problem at all. And that's why my video here is giving him the title of the No Cognitive Dissonance. Now, for most of you who watch my videos are probably already familiar with the term cognitive dissonance. But in case there's any who are not familiar, cognitive dissonance is the uncomfortable feeling caused by holding two contradictory beliefs simultaneously. And I'll finish my thoughts on this in part 3.